Hi, Stu Bamey coming to you from Pawleys Island, South Carolina. Well, you've heard the news and so have I. We've been witness in the last week to the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. We've seen real-time images of unspeakable brutality, of the violation of the very intrinsic value of human life. We've all heard what the news has to say. We've heard the expert panels, but I want to get below the surface. I want to get to the heart of the matter. I want to ask what is really happening and why. But before I do that, I want to thank you for praying and supporting and contributing to this ministry. One of the things about not having the day-to-day responsibilities of church leadership, which I've had most of my life, is I'm able to dive into current topics in a way that I often wasn't able to do before. So I want to dive today into getting to the heart of the matter, of below the surface, of what we don't really see, of the history and the values and the ideology that's shaping these current conflicts. And I want to begin by saying that we have four enemies in the world: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And with those four enemies, right now, we have three hotspots: Ukraine, Taiwan, and the Middle East. I just returned from the Luther Experience study trip, and one of the things we do is dive into Germany between 1918 and the present day. And we're living in East Germany during this trip. So we're living under a people that went through the Nazi regime, and then rather than being freed like West Germany, they went right under 48 years of Soviet oppression. So we get to do a deep dive into what it's like to have a culture that is held captive. And during that process, especially the day that we spend at Buchenwald, we ask the question, where was the church? And most of us come up with the answer: it went to sleep. It went to sleep. That the church doesn't always do a great job of teaching and preparing its people for what's at stake and why. And that's why I want to help you do that, to make sure that you know the essentials of the Christian faith. I want you to understand the doctrine of God and of the doctrine of man and the doctrine of Holy Scripture, so that when we get to these times, we know that if we get those doctrines wrong, those beliefs wrong, then we get everything wrong. So as we're talking about Islam, and as we're talking about the Arab world and Palestine, I also want to bring in the historic Christian essentials of belief and drill those into our minds so that we have them as a platform and a steady rock to stand upon. And let me remind you of what is at stake in the present day conflicts. Let me remind you of a couple things. First, evil is the root and source of all sinfulness in our world. It is dark by nature. We're getting an upfront personal look at evil. And let me remind you, there is real evil in the world, and it comes from a real devil. We use weapons to protect our citizens. Radical Islamists use citizens to protect their weapons. That's evil. There is no regard for the intrinsic value of human life. When human life becomes a commodity, when it doesn't matter whether that's an abortion issue or whether that's killing innocent people, if a person isn't useful to us and they have no value, that is evil. No intrinsic value in and of themselves. That's evil. Evil is dark by nature. Second, we ought to understand what we're up against. Radical Islamism has a strategic plan. They want to destroy Jews and, guess who's next in line? Christians, and then Western civilization. Violence, killing, destruction, deception, fear, terror are all weapons of these kinds of people. They will tell you that the most afraid group is the group that loses. Fear and terror are built into this ideology. It's all part of ISIS and Hamas and Hezbollah. And it's an immediate threat to the Jews and to us as Christians and our kids, your kids and mine, and our grandkids, and Western civilization. 3, we would be wise to get control of our educational system and our family systems. In America, the Muslim Brotherhood of North America has a strategy of indoctrinating our kids through social media and the educational system. That's why it's no surprise of these protests at our colleges and university campuses. They've bought into a lie. They are being indoctrinated by the Muslim Brotherhood of North America. And the problem with that is that maybe we haven't really prepared or educated our kids for when they get to college or the universities. I mean, my experience is that when kids get to the universities, they get slaughtered. Absolutely slaughtered. They don't understand the fundamental beliefs of the Christian faith and how to articulate and defend them. Islam, it is the master of grabbing hold of kids in our schools and our universities. Let's get control of our educational systems. 4, the church tends to be, in these difficult kinds of times, either a victim, a perpetrator, or a bystander. As I mentioned, we went to Buchenwald, and the question we asked there, one of the questions we ask is, where was the church? Where was the Protestant church, and where was the Catholic church? And we see that the churches were either perpetrators or victims, or most importantly, the church were bystanders. The question becomes, when do we get involved? The answer is immediately. It's like a sled. When I was a kid, I used to sled down a hill at a golf course. We'd all meet there after school and slide down this big, long hill. And when the snow was wet, we'd have to really push that sled to get it started. But as it would pick up momentum, it would go faster and faster and faster and faster until you just had to bail out and jump off. It was going so fast. What's happening is a slippery slope. And once it gains momentum, it's hard to get it back. Churches, wake up, stand up, speak, articulate, train, educate, support, prepare people for our people, the people we love, for what's ahead. And finally, we ought to know the fundamentals of what we believe. There are 5 fundamentals of the Christian faith that are extremely important to any believer, and we ought to be able to articulate these and defend them. The first is the inspiration and authority of Scripture as our truth source, as the primary truth source in life. Where is our primary truth source? And we're going to compare that with the truth source of Islam. The second is the virgin birth, the deity of Christ. This shows us our view of sin, of fallenness, of brokenness, and of Jesus, who was born without sin. The third is the authenticity of miracles, to verify the miracle giver, the words and teachings of Jesus. The fourth is substitutionary atonement. This has, again, to do with the view of sin, that we cannot save ourselves. It is not by works, but by faith that we're forgiven. It's the work of Jesus Christ, which we place our faith in. There's that substitutionary atonement. And finally, we believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. As Paul said, if Christ isn't risen, then we're of all people to be the most foolish. Those are 5 fundamentals of our faith that we ought to understand. And there are 4 essentials of Christian belief that sort of round these up. It's the doctrine of the Holy Scriptures. It's the doctrine of the fatherhood and the Trinity of God. It's the doctrine of man and sin. And it's the doctrine of Christ and salvation. We'll talk about those in relationship with Islam as we move through these next couple of weeks. So, I want to contrast the 5 doctrines of Islam with Christianity. Let's start with the 5 doctrines of Islam. The first is this: Allah is the one true God. Islam is monotheistic as opposed to a triune faith that we have in the Christian belief system. 2, Allah has sent many prophets, but Muhammad is the last and the greatest, far, far, far outdistancing Jesus Christ. 3, there are 4 inspired books: the Pentateuch, which is the books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Psalms, the Gospels, and the Quran. 4, there are many intermediaries or spiritual beings floating around us in the world. And finally, 5, there will be a day of judgment. And then Islam has 5 pillars of faith. The Shahada, which is the profession of faith. It's said in Arabic, and it says, I testify that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. That's a big statement. There's no God but Allah, monotheistic, just this big sovereign God, and there's only one great prophet, Muhammad. Second is the Salat, the daily prayers. 5 times a day, the Muslims face Mecca and pray. 3 is the Zakat, the almsgiving, the sharing with others. 4 is the Psalm, fasting from dawn to dusk during the month of Ramadan. 5 is the Hajj, the once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage to Mecca. And the 6th is the Jihad, the holy war. This isn't accepted as one of the 5 pillars by all Muslims, but it is today. It's declared by a religious leader. It is an all-out, violent, deceptive, destroy those people, eliminate them, eradicate them from the face of the earth, holy war. These are the pillars of the faith of Islam. I realize you're getting a lot of information here. Hang with me. I think it'll all make sense as we put all of this together. Let's review some of the basic history, the backstory of how we got to this present-day conflict. When we look at the relationship between the Arabs and the Jews, remember that this has been a clash of 2 cultures, of deep division, of bloodshed for generation after generation after generation after generation after generation. People have been fighting over Palestine for millenniums. Where else is there a piece of land on planet Earth that's been the center of such relevancy over thousands and thousands of years? 4,000 years ago, the Canaanites and the Egyptians were fighting for this land. In 1700 BC, Abraham appears. He has 2 sons, Isaac, the father of the Jewish nation, and Ishmael, the father of the Arabs. 3,000 years ago, we have the first kings of Israel, Saul and David and Solomon. We then have the division of the kingdoms into Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Same area of land. Jump forward to the Middle Ages, to the Dark Ages. In 1097, Pope Urban II declared we should have this thing called the Crusades to free the Holy Land. To free the Holy Land from who? From the Jews and from the Muslims. There was widespread hatred of the Jews in Europe, so much so that by 1200 the Jews were expelled from Great Britain and then Spain and then Europe. In 1917, Great Britain, to protect them, passed the Balfour Declaration, giving the Jews a national home in Palestine. In World War II, the Jews again fled from the Holocaust and from Europe and tried to establish a home in Palestine. After the war in 1947, the United Nations passed Resolution 181, dividing Palestine between the Jews and the Arabs. But they went back to war in 1948 until the Jewish forces finally won. They got 70% of Palestine. Egypt got the Gaza Strip, and Jordan got the West Bank. But still, Israel, Jordan, Egypt, they're at war with each other. In 1979, in my lifetime, they had the Camp David Peace Accord. I remember it well, where finally there was peace between Egypt and Israel. For 5,000 years, this has been a unique piece of land on planet Earth. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Jews, the Arabs, the Ptolemies, the Egyptians, the Seleucids, the Hellenists, the Romans, the Christians, all been fighting over Palestine, the land that gave birth to Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. So that's a brief history, and I mean that is brief. But let's get to the heart of the matter. Pop quiz. What is the difference between Islam, Muslim, and Islamist? Who started Islam? What is the difference between Sunni and Shiite? Okay, let's look at some basic terminology. Islam. In Arabic, it means submission, surrender to the will of Allah. Islam is a religion built on the teachings of Muhammad. Muslim. In Arabic, one who submits to the religion of the teachings of Islam, of Muhammad. Islamist, a radicalized Muslim. Allah is the Arabic name for God, the only God, a monotheistic belief system. Allahu Akbar is the traditional Muslim cry, God is great. Perhaps you've heard people shouting that on TV. Salat is a term for praying 5 times a day facing Mecca and the Kaaba. The Kaaba is a stone building in Mecca. It's Islam's most important mosque. It is their holy site. The Hajj is a once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage that every true Muslim ought to make to the Kaaba in Mecca. A caliph, you hear this, a caliph is a spiritual leader of the Islamic faith. A caliphate is a government under a caliph who oversees the political and religious state of Islam in that area or region. There have been many caliphates since Muhammad. ISIS, what about ISIS? Well, in 2014, the Islamic terror group was formed and declared that they were a caliphate in Iraq, a ruling people of Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan. ISIS is hostile to the United States. It wants to destroy your culture and my culture. It has a radical view of Sharia law, especially when it comes to women and minorities. We've heard a lot about ISIS when we were at war with Afghanistan. Okay, what about Hamas? Well, 1987, the Palestinian Islamist militants formed a terroristic branch funded by Iran that took control of the Gaza Strip. In 2006, they called for the destruction of Israel and the establishment of an Islamic state in historic Palestine. Hezbollah, it means the party of Allah, the party of God. It's an Iranian-backed militant group in Lebanon that's seeking to escalate the war on two fronts in their conflict with Israel, on the west in the Gaza Strip and in the north in Lebanon. Sunnis, 1632, they claim that Muhammad didn't declare his successor, but following his death, a man was elected as leader. Most Arabs are Sunnis, 85% of them, 200 million Arabs are Sunnis. But the Shiites believe that Muhammad designated his own son-in-law to be the first leader of Islam. That means that that person was divinely chosen by Muhammad. Today, the Shiites are led by the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. The Sunnis and the Shiites differ on what parts of the Hadith are true and who should be the ultimate ruler of the people of Islam. And then there's the founder, Muhammad. He said he was the last and the greatest prophet. At the age of 40, he got his first revelations from the angel Gabriel. And over the last 20 years of his life, he memorized these words and shared them with his followers who memorized the words, the revelations he was receiving directly from God through the angels, and eventually that was written down by his companions. He establishes the Muslim religion and the social and religious and political beliefs of the people. Now, over time, Islam developed three sources of authority: the Quran, the complete, final, exact words revealed by Allah, God, to Muhammad by the archangel Gabriel in Arabic. It's called the recitation. It was memorized by Muhammad, dictated to companions, written by scribes, and completed after 20 years. Then he died. It is the rule of faith and belief for the true Islamic Muslim believer. There is the Hadith, which is the collection of what Muhammad did in his life and other things that he said that are not in the Quran. Most of what we know of Muhammad's life came from his wife. She helped to write the Hadith, which creates the customs and the political and social structures of Islam. It's used to interpret the Quran, and it provides examples for the people about how they should live and how they should view life. And finally, in terms of authority structures within the nation of Islam, is the Sharia law, the legal system created by Muhammad. It's a body of religious laws. Incidentally, again, it has no rights really for women or minority groups within the nation. And there are legal decisions that can be made by the caliphs, legal opinions, which are to be enforced. So we've talked about a lot. We've talked about what I'm concerned about. We've talked about history, terminology, how we got to where we are, what Christians believe, what the Muslim faith believes. I want to move forward. We want to talk about truth sources. You know, is it the Quran or is it the Holy Scriptures? We want to talk about the doctrine of God, of whether there's a triune God or we're stuck with monotheism. We want to look at man. Are we born basically good or born basically bad? Is there a need for a savior, a substitutionary atonement, the doctrine of Christ and the soteriology, the work of Jesus? We want to look at the last 2,000 years of anti-Semitism in our world. And I want you to understand the basic essentials of the belief of the Christian faith. I've mentioned my concerns to you, that there is real evil in the world and a real devil that is dark by nature, and we're getting an upfront personal look at that kind of evil. I want you to understand, we talked about what we're up against in this world, the strategic plan. I want you to know that there is the Muslim Brotherhood of North America that is out to get your kids and my kids, and the strategy of indoctrination in our American educational system. And I want you to know what you believe, the 5 fundamentals of the Christian faith and the 4 essentials of Christian belief. I think if you start to grasp this stuff, you'll be a Christian who's able to stand on the solid ground. Remember, I've been saying hell is hot, time is short, and the stakes are high. That's what a time like this does. It says to us, let's get going, let's get up, let's stand firm in our faith. Hell is hot, time is short, and the stakes are high.